Hey guys, I'm Tom the Tech Chap, and this is Sony's new flagship phone, the Xperia 1 Mark II. I've been really excited to test this out because I still think that last year's Xperia 1, which we'll just call the Mark 1 for now, was actually one of the year's more underrated phones. But the question is the Mark II a big upgrade, and is it worth paying £1,100 or $1,200 for? Well, let's start with what's new, and there's been a few design tweaks. For example, it's about 0.5 millimeter thinner now, the camera module's been moved to the side, they finally merged the power button with that side fingerprint reader, which makes a lot of sense, so now it's just a one touch to wake and unlock. They've also ever so slightly trimmed the top bezel, and now both speakers are front firing and they've been moved right to the edge. But I think one of the most surprising changes is the addition of this 3.5mm headphone jack. I mean, last year's Xperia 1 didn't even have one, and it's one of the few 2020 flagships that actually comes with one. So, for that reason alone, maybe it might be worth buying. We still get Gorilla Glass 6 on both the front and the back, which looks good, although it's still one of the slipperiest phones I've ever used. You should absolutely put a case on this, as if you're attempting finger gymnastics to reach the top of the extra tall screen, you are definitely going to drop it sooner or later. Despite this though, I still really do like the design, and it's kind of refreshing actually just to have a symmetrical bezel. There's not a notch or a hole punch cut out in sight. But the bigger upgrade is on the inside, with a new Snapdragon 865 chip, 8 gigs of RAM up from 6 last year, as well as now just a single 256GB storage option using faster UFS 3 storage, plus microSD card support. That's up from the paltry 64 and 128GB models last year. So a new processor, more RAM, more storage, but I think the biggest upgrade hardware-wise is the battery. We now get a 4,000 mAh cell, up from 3,330 on the Xperia 1, so this lasts a good deal longer. And the fact that Sony's stuck with a 60Hz screen, which is a bit controversial and we'll talk about in a second, that also helps battery life. So actually this thing is surprisingly long lasting. I've been using it for the past week or so, and I'm getting about 5 hours of screen on time. And by the end of a normal day, I still have about 30% of my battery left, which is pretty good actually. A full charge takes about an hour and a half, although a quick 30-minute top-up will get you to 50% of the battery. And also for the first time, we now get wireless charging, which is nice. A few other features like Bluetooth 5.1, Wi-Fi 6, and also 5G support, and then we have this camera, which is now a quad lens setup, with the usual main, ultra-wide, and telephoto lenses, but now with the addition of a time-of-flight sensor for more realistic bokeh and portrait shots. So far so good then, but the real selling point of the Xperia Mark II is this screen, this 6.5-inch 4K OLED HDR screen. And with this 21:9 ratio, it means you can watch movies in full screen with little or no letterboxing. And paired with a dynamic vibration that makes a return, giving you a kind of haptic feedback, basically a rumble to go along with a movie, game, or music you're playing, everything about this phone is designed to give you the ultimate mobile cinema experience. And it's awesome. Firing up a bit of Call of Duty or playing a 4K HDR YouTube video, it looks stunning. Plus the Mark II seems brighter and the colors more vibrant than the Mark I. You can also now switch to creator mode in the display options, which is kind of like cinema mode, giving us less vivid but more realistic colors, and again closer to that cinema experience. All that paired with Dolby Atmos supporting front-firing speakers and support for high-res audio, yeah, it's good. But the problem is, not all games support this wider 21:9 aspect ratio, and while movies look great, if you're watching YouTube videos or regular shows shot in 16:9, then you're going to have big pillar boxing either side. Then there's the 4K resolution, which Sony have been pushing on their phones since I think the Z5, I think that was back in 2015, but to be honest with you, I still don't think it's really worth it. I love the idea, but it's just not that useful. I mean, Netflix, Prime Video, and Play Movies are all still capped at 1080p on mobile. And while if you do find some good native 4K content, say on YouTube, and take full advantage of that crazy 643 pixels per inch sharpness, I mean, put it right up to your eyes, and yes, you can see the difference. It's incredibly sharp, but I just don't think most people are going to get much benefit out of the 4K screen in real life. Plus, it only gives you 4K, well, actually slightly less than 4K, 3840 by 1644 to be exact, when it detects 4K content. Otherwise, it sticks to 2560 by 1096 to save battery. The thing is, I wouldn't really have as much of a problem with the 4K screen if it wasn't for the fact that it compromises Sony to stick with a 60Hz refresh rate screen. So unlike most other flagships in 2020, which give us 90 or 120 Hz, because of that 4K resolution, we're still stuck at 60 here. Now, to be fair, they have added a reduced motion blur feature that is supposed to kind of simulate a smoother 90Hz refresh, and it helps. It feels kind of like when you turn on the motion smoothing on your TV, but it's just not quite the same as a proper 120Hz screen. And in my mind, while 4K is something you might enjoy every once in a while, a high frame rate would make the whole experience of using your phone feel faster, from scrolling through menus, apps, and importantly, playing games. So unlike other phones that offer faster 120Hz and also more responsive 240Hz touch latency, it means that, while immersive, the Xperia 1 Mark II just isn't a great gaming phone. But what about you? If you had to pick between 4K and 120Hz, which would you go for? Let me know in the comments below. But putting all that to one side, it's still a lovely phone to use. We get Android 10 with Sony's UI on top. Left of the home screen is the Google News feed. We also get the multi-window app for easy multitasking with two apps on top of each other, which makes sense given the taller screen. There's also SideSense for quick app shortcuts, and of course Sony's Pro Photo and Video modes if you want to tinker and get the most out of the camera. We also get a game boost mode with a few options to boost performance, stop notifications, and record gameplay. One criticism I do have though is that there's no face unlock option with this. The only biometric security option you have is the fingerprint reader, which is fine, it's fast, it's reliable, but it seems quite odd to not have any face unlocking at all, and maybe it's not as big a deal these days because everyone's wearing face masks when you're out and about, but at home I'm just kind of used to picking up my phone, not even thinking about it, and it just, automatically unlocks with my face. With this, I have to make sure my thumb or my index finger is planted on the power button each time to unlock it. It's just kind of a weird omission. Okay, let's talk about this camera, and here are the key specs. And most notably, the main 12 megapixel camera has a 50% bigger sensor than in last year's Xperia 1. And paired with a 3x telephoto, ultra-wide, and new time-of-flight lens, it's a pretty versatile camera setup. Now, first things first, if you want to get the most out of this camera, you're going to have to get familiar with the Pro Photo and Video apps. It's not for everyone, but part of maybe why you want to buy this is the ability to fully control the camera. However, I'll be honest and say that I'm not a pro photographer, so while it's fun to dabble in these apps, most people, including myself, will just be using the regular camera app. Although to be honest, you could get most of these features just by downloading Filmic Pro on any other phone. So here's a few snaps from the Mark II, and along with a bigger sensor, they've also improved the real-time eye autofocus tracking. And you can see Daisy here is in focus every time despite moving around. So focusing is snappy, the colors look realistic, and the dynamic range is also better than last year, something the Mark I really struggled with more detail in the darker areas and less blown out highlights. It also holds up pretty well against the iPhone 11 Pro, although I have noticed in a couple of shots there's a slightly purple tint to Sony's photos. And it still can't quite match the iPhone's aggressive HDR, although I know it can sometimes give the iPhone shots an unnatural look. So it's definitely a step up from the Mark I, but it does still fall down a bit in low light shots. There's no dedicated night mode, instead it'll automatically sense low light and give you a 2 or 3 second long exposure, but again, compared to the iPhone, it can fall behind in terms of white balance, detail, and dynamic range when in tricky lighting. Also, just look at these portrait shots. Dynamic range just goes out the window, and quite honestly, it looks like something you'd get from a $300 phone. As for video, the Mark II can shoot in up to 4K at 30 FPS, but there's no 4K 60 or even 8K unfortunately. And the HDR mode is still limited to 1080p. But here's a side-by-side with the iPhone at 4K, and there's a clear difference in terms of brightness and vibrancy. The iPhone definitely looks more appealing, and looking at the sky, you can see it handles the highlights better. You can see as I'm walking, the stabilization can't quite match the iPhone. I've also had some issues with the Sony getting very dark while filming, something I just couldn't fix even by tapping on the screen and trying to adjust the exposure. And finally around the front we have an 8 megapixel selfie camera. In good light, quality and detail is solid, but it definitely struggles in low light, either under or overexposing, and a lot of detail is lost. So then, should you buy the Sony Xperia Mark II? Well, this is undoubtedly Sony's best phone in years. It's a solid upgrade over the Mark I, and with a headphone jack, Pro Photo modes, and a 21:9 4K screen, it does have a lot to offer. But it is very expensive, and personally I don't really feel that 4K adds a whole lot, especially at the expense of not having a high refresh rate. And also, while the camera is definitely an improvement, and in good light it can take a great photo, it still falls behind the competition in low light, selfies, and video. I genuinely really do like the Mark II, and I think by now you'll probably have a good idea if this is the phone for you, but I don't think it's for me, especially at £1,100. I think maybe if Sony was a little more aggressive with the pricing, say if this came in at £900, then it would be a lot easier to recommend. But as always, that's just my opinion. I'd love to hear what you guys think of the Mark II. Would you be tempted to buy this, and do you think you get much use out of that 4K screen? Let me know in the comments below. And if you do want to see more from me, don't forget to hit that little subscribe button below and ding that notification bell and all those YouTuber cliches. And I'll see you next time right here on the Tech Chap. Thanks for watching.